Hello, and welcome to a brief overview of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This mini documentary is presented and narrated by Kevin Chamorro, and it is intended for an audience of elementary students trying to get a brief overview or some background knowledge in the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So let's get started, ladies and gentlemen. Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia, in the southern part of the United States. He was born in January 15th, 1929. He was a young African American male that enjoyed playing with the neighboring friends in this beautiful home right here in Atlanta, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta. He played with a lot of his neighboring children that were white kids, and because of the nature at the time, how African Americans and white Americans they were being discriminated at the time. So eventually the parents of these white children said to Martin Luther King, "Hey, I don't want you hanging out with my children anymore." He didn't quite understand why. And later on we discovered that Martin Luther King Jr. was a very smart and question-seeking child. So he asked his mother, and his mother explained exactly what goes on with racism and segregation. Furthermore, he went to the University of Morehouse College, where he obtained his degree in a sociology degree. He got it in 1944. Then he moved on to graduate from the University of Crozer in Theological Seminary. He got his graduate degree in theology, where later he attended the Boston University, where he got his doctorate in theological studies, which is the study of religion. Right before he graduated, he married a beautiful African American woman named Coretta Scott. They had 4 lovely children, and they lived in right outside of Montgomery. This is where he worked as a minister at a church in his neighborhood, which was his father's old church as well. He had 4 children. However, he didn't want his children to be raised like he was, in a discriminatory neighborhood, in a discriminatory world. He didn't want his children to succumb what he has, where he wasn't allowed to go to restaurants that didn't have signs that we serve blacks as well, or coloreds allowed. No, because in a lot of places back then, white people were only allowed to go at certain restaurants. White people were allowed to drink in certain water fountains. Even white people were given more privileges in riding the city buses. As you can see here, this is the Cleveland Avenue bus, where Rosa Parks refused to sit in the back, or she sat down after a long day's work, and the bus was getting really busy. So the bus driver said, "Excuse me, you need to unboard the bus. You need to leave the bus and make your seat available for white people." She refused to leave the bus, and she got convicted and arrested on the spot. No questions asked. Because this was a city ordinance. This was a violation of the Montgomery City Code. It was against the law for African Americans to sit in the bus if there are white people that need that seat, and they needed to sit in the back. Well, meanwhile, this triggered an awareness to the civil rights movement, which Martin Luther King Jr. was president of, because he had the education, he had the community standing behind him. He was well liked and had great speech and communication tactics. So he devised a plan to prevent people from to stop the African American population of Montgomery, Alabama, to refuse to ride the bus for 382 days until the city bus ordinance was lifted. So they marched, they all walked to work. They refused to ride on the bus because of Rosa Parks. Meanwhile, he continued on advocating the civil rights movement. He continued on, went around all over the United States, traveled millions of miles to giving speeches and bringing that awareness to people in the United States that, hey, what we are doing is wrong. This is a free country, and we are not free. The black population of America, we are segregated. We are not allowed to drink off of certain water fountains. We are not treated the same. We are not allowed to vote for the next president. Many people did not like him. He got arrested several times. He was arrested about 20 times in all. Because people did not like him and did not like what he stand for, they actually resorted to violence, and he got stabbed a couple times and beaten several times. His brother's house was burned down to the ground as well, as you can see here. But this did not discourage Martin Luther King Jr. He continued to bring awareness to the civil rights movement, and in 1960, gaining all this national attention, he continued the efforts of the civil rights movement. Even though that his brother's house was burned down, he was going to jail several times, even though that he was being hated by several people. By August 28th, 1963, he gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. He made a historical march with 200,000 people marching down to the Washington Lincoln Memorial, where he gave his famous speech. In this speech, he said, "I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." He doesn't want his children to grow up in a society like that he lived in. He doesn't want his children to grow up feeling discriminated. He wants his children to go to public schools where their children can go to schools with white people, with white children. Because back then, blacks had to go to all black schools. Blacks had to ride all black buses to go to school. They weren't allowed to they had to give up their bus seats for white people back then too. He didn't want his kids to have to deal with what he had to go through. No Negroes allowed, no whites allowed. He didn't want his kids feeling that way. So he continued marching on with his efforts of the civil rights movement. So with 200,000 plus people marching down to the Lincoln Memorial with him, he gave his famous speech, which is as follows. As you can see, he gave a very beautiful speech, and the people were listening. He was bringing all that national attention to himself and to his organization and to the civil rights movement. Laws were being passed. People were accepting African Americans in restaurants. However, it wasn't enough. We still wanted to make the Civil Rights Act. We still wanted that act to become a law in all of the United States. So that's what he continued to work on for the next 4 years. By April 3rd, 1968, Martin Luther King was unfortunately assassinated in the balcony of his motel. It was the Lorraine Motel where a sniper shot a bullet and killed Martin Luther King Jr. Again, like mentioned before, Martin Luther King Jr. was not liked by many, loved by a lot, but disliked by a lot as well. He was shot to death, gunned down in Memphis in his hotel. The ceremony, as you can see here, a lot of people grieved, but his work for the civil rights movement continued, and the Civil Rights Act was passed into a law. And a year later, he received the Nobel Peace Prize for all his efforts, for all that work that he has done. It did not go unnoticed. Martin Luther King was a great man, deserves a lot of respect, and I look forward to seeing you guys working more with Martin Luther King Jr. A great man and a great hero of the United States, brought the Civil Rights Bill made the Civil Rights Bill become a law in all of the United States, helped African Americans have the same rights as white Americans. Now black people can also vote. Because of him, there are no more segregation. White and black kids can go to the same schools. Because of him, black men, black women can vote and feel like they're free in this glorious, beautiful United States of freedom. Thank you for viewing, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my name is Kevin Chamorro, and if you would like to read some more information on Martin Luther King Jr., all you have to do is do a Google search on Martin Luther King Jr., and you will have a plethora of valuable information. And again, I look forward to continue working with you guys in this amazing unit of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you and have a great day.